Welcome to the first panel discussion of the afternoon. It's called Ready for Takeoff, where we'll explore what the future of aviation in Canada might look like and understand the factors at play that is creating that future. My name is Tom Clark. Let me introduce myself. I'm the moderator. The panel is the star. I'm just the guy saying, hey, what about you? But a little bit about me and why I was really quite excited to join this panel. I'm the chairman of Global Public Affairs. We are the largest public affairs, privately held public affairs company in Canada. And specifically, we have a division that is specialized in issues on transportation and infrastructure. So we already represent a number of companies in the aerospace and aviation sector. And it's a particular fascination for me because I happen to be a pilot. So I'm sort of part of the aviation world. Now, I don't fly 737s or anything like that. I fly somewhat smaller aircraft, usually with floats on it, because I like exploring this huge, wonderful country that we have. And I guess my other reason that I'm here is that I've done a lot of flying for 45 years, 50 years, actually. I was probably in a lot of your living rooms. I've been a journalist in this country for almost half a century now. And as a foreign correspondent, a political correspondent, I did 8 war zones. I was offered 9 and I decided to turn it down, the law of averages and everything. So here I am and surrounded by some terrifically interesting people in an area that myself and my company are particularly interested in. These are glasses. Remember, I told you I've been around for 50 years working. This is what happens. Now, you've just heard a conversation, an in-depth conversation with the Chamber's CEO, Pierre, and Air Canada's CEO, Michael Russo, where they covered the impacts of COVID and the future of aviation from the perspective of public transportation and obviously an airline, Air Canada. So with our panelists here, what we're going to do is take a look at those very same topics, but from the other side of the coin, through a different type of lens, and how understanding how the underlying parts of the aviation industry have been touched by COVID, how they've managed, and hear ideas on how to build a brighter future for aviation and aerospace in Canada. Now, I'll just preface all of this by saying aerospace is a huge deal for the Canadian economy. It accounts for about $13 billion of GDP, 90,000 direct jobs. And if you expand that out to include the rest of the supply chain, it grows to $25 billion in GDP and about 160,000 direct and indirect jobs. So this is a huge, huge deal. And when it's in trouble, we're in trouble. And by that, I mean the country. So to speak to these issues and explain the impacts, I am joined and happy to introduce our panel to you. We have Tom Ruth, President and CEO of the Edmonton International Airport, Marc, the Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of CAE, Nancy Barber, the Senior Advisor for de Havilland Aircraft of Canada. Incidentally, as a float plane pilot, Nancy, thank you for building the Beaver, probably the most legendary aircraft that has ever been built. And Pierre, Bombardier's Vice President of Government Affairs. Welcome to you all. Well, dating back, panel, to 1909 in Quebec, Nova Scotia, and the flight of the Silver Dart, we've had a long history in this country with aviation and aerospace, and it's a good thing that we do, because with a country as large as ours and a population spread out across vast distances, many of our communities, much more so than people may think, are really only accessible by air at certain times of the year. So to begin with, what I'd like to do is ask you to just take a couple of minutes. I've already introduced who you are and what job you do, but I'm wondering if you could just take 1 or 2 minutes to tell everybody what's on your mind. And let me go to the guy with the great first name. Tom Ruth, over to you.
You're on mute.
You're on mute. That's the
first time this year, I think. Let me just start by saying I'm probably the old guy on the panel. I've been in aviation and logistics for 40 years. And if you're in this business, it kind of gets in your blood, and you end up finding a way to thrive in the ups and the downs. As you mentioned, a little bit about COVID, certainly with aviation, 90% of our revenues are based on passenger numbers. So we certainly had to do a lot of cost cutting. About a third of our workforce weren't with us, and because of COVID, 75% reduction in capital, and passenger numbers a third of what they were before. But lots of positives, which we'll talk about later. I just thought I'd share in the next minute or a minute and a half a little bit about Edmonton, some things people might not know, and how it relates to EIA is our geographic advantage. You might say, well, we're so far north. What's our geographic advantage? Well, 3 or 4. One is that we're the largest metropolitan population that has over 1 million people in North America. It's that far north. We have the largest landmass of any airport in Canada, which gives us huge advantages, which I'll allude to later. We're the gateway to the north, which is another advantage. And the circumpolar routes are something that all of us in Canada can take more advantage of in the future. And of course, we have this burgeoning e-commerce that we'll talk a little bit more about. I just leave everybody with the fact that may not know, what's the fastest growing country in Amazon's network? That's Canada. So we are at the forefront of some major positive developments in terms of one of the most explosive growth areas anywhere in the world. So I'll stop there, and I really want to thank the Chamber for holding this event, and Tom for facilitating it.
Thanks very much, Tom. And you're right. We're going to get back to you. We're going to be talking about not so much the past, but really the future. And for that, I want to throw it to Marc St-Hilaire. Marc, over to you.
Let me remove the mute before. Good afternoon, everybody. Real pleasure, and thank you, Tom. My name is Marc St-Hilaire. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at CA. I'm also a veteran aerospace engineer. I've been in the Canadian aerospace engineering domain for more than 36 years. I got gray hair, which I hidden away behind the blue there. And I got glasses too. 2 words about CA. CA, high technology global leader, giant company, essentially with a vision to be the partner of choice at the digital immersion, that immersive frontier between reality and the synthetic world, training aviation, civil pilots, military pilots, and even healthcare professionals. Over 10,000 employees present all around the world in over 35 countries, training centers, engineering development centers, training schools, even the airport, ground operations, learning essentially young people how to become a pilot from early on in their journey on single propeller aircraft. Over $3 billion of revenue on a yearly basis. Quite an innovative entrepreneurial company. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here this afternoon to share the stories about what we went through over the COVID, and also where are we going over the future, where the aviation and the aerospace sector are going to end up, hopefully. Thank you, Tom.
Terrific, Marc. Thank you very much. Moving right along, and Nancy, I'll help you out. You're on mute. Now you're not. Over to you, Nancy.
Thanks so much, Tom. And thanks to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. It's very inspiring, honestly, for the industry. I tuned in this morning for Sir Richard Branson, and it made me proud to be Canadian, to have sort of this very influential individual reflect on the strength of Canadian aerospace. So I think this is a fabulous day for everyone to be a part of. It's great to be here alongside my fellow panelists. I've had the great pleasure of working with through my 23-year career in aerospace, especially alongside Pierre and Marc. So it's wonderful to be here with both of them. Just a little bit about myself, because I did switch sort of careers a bit through the midst of the pandemic. But I have been in aerospace for 23 years now. I joined aerospace with Bombardier just when I left university in 1998. And when I departed in February of this year, I started in March in an advisory role for the Havilland Aircraft of Canada, which is interesting for me as well, because it's almost full circle. The Dash 8 was one of the first programs that I ever worked on when I started with Bombardier at the Toronto site in '98. I'm also a board of director for Women in Aerospace Canada, and I've always been a very keen advocate and ambassador for women in this industry. And I think it's an important part also of the dialogue in terms of the future of aerospace. I've had the opportunity in my career to work not only across commercial aircraft, but business aircraft as well as aerostructures. And I think I've been through almost every function in the organization, including customer services and support, supply chain, program management, product development, operations, industrialization, and so on. I've had the privilege of being a part of both of the leadership teams for the C series or the A220 and of course the Global 7500. And in all reality, my true love in aerospace is product development. And this is where I think we have the ability to push the industry forward and continue to be, on the forefront of the world in terms of aerospace. And it is a very important part of who we are as Canadian aerospace. To me, the conversation that we're having today is especially critical for our industry. I've reflected on this a number of times. And as we emerge from this pandemic, it's almost like our industry is at a bit of a crossroads. It's not just going through a transformation, but to me, in fact, it's almost going through a reset. And it's critical for our future in Canadian aerospace that we really invest today in new technologies and products, especially those that are sustainable. And we certainly have the national talent to keep Canada on the forefront of aerospace design and development. And so what we invest in the next 18 to 24 months really will create a foundation and the roadmap for the next 10 to 20 years. And so this panel to me is especially timely, and I'm really looking forward to the dialogue over the course of the next hour. So thank you for including me, and I'll pass it back to you, Tom.
We couldn't do it without including you, Nancy. You bring a terrific perspective to all of this. Let's go to Pierre Pyun now from Bombardier. Pierre.
Thank you, Tom. So my name is Pierre Pyun. I'm the Vice President for Government Affairs at Bombardier. I've been with the company close to 10 years. Before that, I was in the Canadian government working in the Foreign Service. I spent some time abroad. Spent some time in China, in particular Beijing and in Hong Kong. I'm a lawyer by training, and before that, before joining the government and then Bombardier, I used to work in a law firm as well. But the bulk of my career, I've been involved with the aerospace industry, and I have to say that I've been really blown away by the tremendous amount of innovation, skills, foresight, passion, leadership, entrepreneurship, poise in the Canadian aerospace industry, and really an industry that many jurisdictions consider as strategic and of national interest, even because of its linkages to important demand for connectivity, mobility, connections to innovation, R&D, and also connections to defense and security, sovereignty of nations. So I think it's really fair to say that Canada has been kind of punching above its weight over the years. And I think it's also fair to say that the company I work for, Bombardier, has been a centerpiece of the aerospace industry for many years. We have launched 35 new aircraft programs in 3 decades. And as a matter of fact, we're just talking about it yesterday. Bombardier was very proud to launch our 35th program in Montreal, but it was a global launch, the Challenger 3500, which is a major upgrade to the Challenger 350 with new avionics, new interiors as well. And a focus when we designed the aircraft on reducing the environmental footprint of the aircraft as well. And I would echo the comments made by my colleagues. I think that's the way of the future. The aircraft comes with the Environment Product Declaration, attesting to its environmental performance. And also it's the first business aircraft for which the flight test program was carbon neutral. I'd be remiss not to talk about our flagship product, just quickly, the 7500. That was a major investment on the part of Bombardier. I'm very happy to share the panel with Nancy, because Nancy was very instrumental in the launch of this program. But I think it's another demonstration. I mean, it's a disruptive technology. It entered in service 2.5 years ago. and it's made in Canada, assembled in Toronto and completed in Montreal. But I think, I wanted to flag this because it's a demonstration of the tremendous amount of skill sets that exist in Canada to design, do system integration, and essentially we're able to build the aircraft from A to Z. So that's a skill set that many countries are really vying for. And just one last comment, and I know we're going to come back to the impact of the pandemic and what the future looks like. But for Bombardier, as we were navigating through the pandemic, we were also effecting a major transformation for the company. We made the strategic decision to focus on business aviation. So we divested our interest in the last years in rail transportation and commercial aviation as well. But for business aviation, Canada is a leader. We have a very strong base here in Canada with 10,000 employees, direct jobs dedicated to business aviation within Bombardier, with a large supply chain, 600 suppliers, and we spend $1.2 billion in goods and services from Canada-based suppliers, and we export 90% of our output. So I think the future is I think there's a lot of potential for growth, but also a lot of work to do in order to preserve what we have, but also to grow what we have. And I look forward to the conversation, and I'll turn it over to you, Tom. But thank you very much for hosting this and the chamber as well, and for the opportunity to participate.
Well, thanks very much, Pierre. And one thing, when you're listening to all the panelists, it's quite incredible where Canada fits on the global scale of aviation and aerospace. I mean, Pierre says we're punching above our weight. Boy, are we ever punching above our weight. And I think that what we're going to talk about now is how do we secure that? How do we grow that? How do we make sure that our advantage, the Canadian advantage in aviation and aerospace, remains strong? I just before we get to the discussion, a word now to our audience. There's going to be some questions and answers, and we're going to get discussions going, but we really do want to hear from you. If you have any questions, comments, or anything that you want the panel to speak to, please enter them into Slido. I think that came along with your invitation. The Canadian Chamber will filter them for me, so keep that in mind. The Slido link to submit questions is attached to the registration information that you got via email, so just go back to that, find Slido, click on it, and there you go. And we will make sure that there is time before we exit this at 2:15 Eastern time, which is a promise, by the way, 2:15. We are an on-time panel here, and we will have you up by 2:15. But there is going to be time for you to enter this discussion, and I will include your comments as we go along anyway. Okay, let's get to it. Panel, the impacts on travel are well known. Passenger business was down 90%, slightly more than 90%. The impact of that drop is pretty clear to the airlines. You lose 90% of your passengers, you're losing 90% of your revenue and of your income. But of course, it really doesn't stop there. It's airports, Tom, manufacturers, maintenance facilities, training suppliers, CAE, all the businesses that have airlines as their customers have in turn felt the impact of what we've been going through for the past 18 months. So if you don't mind, and let me make it clear to the panel, I want this, jump in if you hear something that interests you. Don't wait for me to invite you in. We'll keep this going as quickly as we can, but could you each give me one example of what was your biggest challenge and what was your biggest pivot as a result of that challenge? How did you handle it? And just to mix things up a little bit, Nancy, let's start with you this time.
Sure, absolutely. So huge change in strategy, right? And I think we need to reflect, sort of that pre-pandemic condition that we exist in. So if you think about, we rung in the new year of 2020, right? And personally, I was actually in Antarctica, which was amazing. I mean, it's like you come home from Antarctica and then you get to sit in your living room for 18 months. So what a dichotomy, but that sort of represents, what's happened to this industry. 2020 promised to be an absolutely huge year. I mean, when you look at the economies that are booming, worldwide economic growth, aerospace in Canada, I think we were close to being sort of maxed out, right? We were in a position where we were doing outsources and offloads to be able to sustain the ramp ups that we required for not only product development, but also production. And so March 13th came, and I referenced that specifically in terms of, border closures. And it felt like in Canada, most certainly, that the world just stopped. And initially, of course, the greatest challenge was around understanding what we're dealing with and making sure that we're keeping our employees safe, which I think as an industry, we did exceptionally well in terms of implementing health and safety protocols, whether it be in manufacturing facilities or service facilities or airports. We did everything we possibly could. I think the pivot point was the reality sinking in of this was not a let's stay home for 2 weeks and flatten the curve. We as an industry, despite the many theoretical models that we worked, whether it be a U recovery, a V recovery, a W recovery, we didn't really know how long it was going to go on for. And so I think, the industry did really pivot in terms of what do we do as aircraft manufacturers if we don't have the same, basic revenue model of production rates and production aircraft at the same volume? How do we maintain that top line revenue number and continue to sustain ourselves and continue to keep as many people employed as possible? And so really the pivot, most certainly, especially in terms of, the role right now that I'm working with de Havilland, a pivot to look at more of sort of these aftermarket offerings. What are secondary markets for used aircraft? If you look at, what Michael was saying from Air Canada in terms of cargo, so looking at cargo modifications of airplanes, it was all sort of to understand that there will be a volume of extra aircraft on the market. And so how do we repurpose and reutilize and reoffer to be able to continue to sustain ourselves? And how do we also insource potentially portions of the supply chain? So it was a matter of sustaining, trying to maintain those revenue numbers, but in a much different fashion than what we were traditionally doing. And so to me, that is, and that sort of maintains the challenge of we have to keep reinventing ourselves right now, because the traditional world of aircraft production is still not, and we're not sure when we'll come back.
Can I just move from there to Tom, because Tom, in a way, looking at the Edmonton International Airport, you're almost caught between what Michael Russo at Air Canada is feeling on one end and what Nancy has just described at the other end. You're sort of the meat in the sandwich on all of this. So essentially the same to you. I mean, the biggest challenge, the biggest pivot, which would be entirely different from those other two.
For sure. I think one of the things we all share, though, Tom, is that the economic impact in aviation and aerospace is gigantic. It permeates throughout everybody's life. And so when COVID hit, it wasn't just the safety component, which is the most important that Nancy mentioned, but the financing is, we all felt a responsibility and feel a responsibility to revitalizing the economy. So for us, once we got through all the shock, it was around what can we do? Because we're in one sentence, what our role is after safety and security at our airport. My job is to create economic prosperity in a fiscally responsible way. And so how are we going to continue to do that under these dire circumstances? So our pivot point was all around initially cargo. Is we ended up bringing in a disproportionately large amount of PPE and other medical equipment into Edmonton, again, taking advantage of the circumpolar route and how quickly we can get things from overseas. And that kind of gave us pretty quickly a bit of more of a sense of purpose and mission of going after the things that we can control and influence. So I would say that on that initial pivot, there's a bunch of things we've done since. It was just making sure that we kept that front and center and knowing that we were still doing valuable things for Canadians.
Marc, again, because it's sort of a different area for you and CAE, but when you hit that in March of 2020, and all of a sudden pilots weren't being hired, they were being laid off, training seemed to be rather unnecessary for planes that were sitting on the ground. challenge, pivot. Where did you go on that?
I mean, it's quite of a story. I think we ran out of superlative to describe the situation, like unprecedented, unparalleled. Like Nancy was saying, at the beginning of 2020, the industry was in a huge boom. And beginning of March, essentially the world stopped, but it didn't stop flat. We still had simulators to deliver, and we'd still had training, and we'd still have development program ongoing. So our first challenge that we faced was, how do we continue delivering that business, that level of business? So internally, I mean, we made over the couple of years, previous year, a sizable investment into the IT infrastructure. And from within like a day to the next, all the employees were sent home and started remote working, and something that people were denying or were seeing it's not going to be possible, it worked. Essentially, everybody was connected to the cloud, and the engineering people, development teams were essentially functional in a matter of a second. So that was our first challenge we faced. And thank God to the IT folks and the investment we made in the past. The second challenge we faced is we had to deliver those simulators across the closed borders, and we had to have them qualified with certification agency who didn't want to travel. So we developed a whole series of remote capabilities where a simulator would be into the hands of the customer in a city in the US, and the certification agency would be in Atlanta, essentially witnessing remotely and optimizing, qualifying the simulator. I mean, that proved to be a very, very effective competitive advantage that's going to survive the COVID. That remote capability of operating the machine, observing what's happening inside. And that took us to the last point where, we had instructors who were in very close. If you've been in a simulator, it's a closed environment. You have 2 pilots and instructor, and we have to socially distance people. So we developed a series of remote instructor stations, and the instructor could be off the simulator, or could be even in his basement at home in a different city, and would supervise and command the simulator. So it sort of propelled us, but that is not the end of it, because we're sort of a deep culture of entrepreneurs and innovators here, and me and all my colleagues, we wanted to participate to that war against COVID, and it was a call of duty. Unfortunately, our CEO was visionary enough to say, okay, let's jump into this and to see what we can do to help the front line. I mean, we're not nurses, we're not doctors, we're not first responders. I mean, we're engineers, and we're supply chain, we're manufacturing people. And we started to think how we can put our skill sets to the fight, the real fight. And from 1 week to the other, our global supply chain started to buy N95 masks from China. There was a battle to get N95 masks across to China. So we bought literally 150,000 masks and had them ferry over, sold to the government. That was the first. Then we started to put online free training material for the inhaled therapist, how to recognize COVID, how to intubate people. So there was web training material because there was a shortage of skill. Then the ventilator story, which is highly public. I'm not going to go into the story, but the Canadian government told us, we need ventilators. We cannot get them across the borders. The countries are closed and they won't sell to us. And we say, we think we can do this. We got engineering capability, we got manufacturing capability. We're completely vertically integrated for the minute silicon components right up to the man-machine interface. We ended up making 8,300 ventilators that were sold to the Canadian government. There was qualified Health Canada and FDA. So a massive experience that a lot of people are going to remember all their life. And the last piece of the puzzle is, at one point it looks like vaccination would be the issue. So we've opened up a company-based vaccination at CAE, or a capability of vaccinating 1,000 people a year with the whole IT infrastructure hookup to the Quebec healthcare system. It provided a tremendous engagement, but it caused us to think strategically. It's okay, we can do this. We got skill sets that we were born in aerospace, system engineering, electronics, software, and we realized we can leverage those skill sets and project in other markets. I mean, we've opened up a line of medical equipment capability. We were qualified ISO 9001 and AS 9100 for producing qualifiable aerospace. we've applied for the medical one, ISO 13485, and within 2 months, we were certified ISO with legitimate capability. So it changed the company, and not only we've emerged with competitive tool sets and capability that were not there before, or would have taken I would say 5 to 10 years to move through a regulated environment. You know, within a space of a year, FAA approved the remote operation in the simulator, and a capability in making complicated man-machine systems, which are involved into life and death situation and other things in aerospace. So overall, you know, it's quite I mean, I know it was a crisis, but we turned it into something which is transformational for the company.
Yeah. A lot, you're doing a lot more than training, which is.
I know. People don't realize that we're doing. I mean,
Yeah.
If you give me 2-3 minutes, just you know, in the civil aviation, you know, if you look inside one of our customer, an airline is a big logistics operation. You know, it needs within a space of 20 minutes get an aircraft, fuel, pilots, crew, baggage, and it needs, you know, all to leave there. And, you know, so training of the pilot is just one of the elements. All the logistics around it, you know, the operation, the efficiency, the roster of the pilot are all domains where we have a foot at the present time.
But you know what, Pierre, you know what interested me about your story, and I think it's true for everybody in aviation and aerospace, is that really what 2020 did is it brought 2030 into 2020 immediately. In other words, those 10 years that we thought we had to innovate and think about what we want to do next, we did it right away. And in your case, you went digital, which is something that you probably wouldn't have done without the pandemic. And now you've opened up a whole new business tranche. But you know, I want to get Pierre involved in this as well, because you know, the pivot for you and for Bombardier would have been interesting simply because, as you said, you were repositioning anyway to the business market. And I don't know about you or any of our audience here, but you hear that as commercial travel has been more difficult, borders being closed and so on, a lot of businesses have been looking now at business aircraft because it's sometimes a more efficient way of getting around. But let me throw that to you and ask you that same question about the biggest challenge and the biggest pivot.
Thank you, Tom. So, I mean, there's no question for us. 2020 was difficult when the pandemic and the lockdowns hit. So, like other aerospace segments, we were impacted. We had to adjust our production rate. Some of our operations mandated by government directives, we had to suspend operations for a few weeks. We experienced disruptions in the supply chain. And as my colleagues noted, I think it was really critical for us, for the aerospace industry to be at the forefront of safety and health measures, to be able to keep operating and keep our employees and local communities safe. And, you know, like CAE, we open up with Air Canada and Montreal Airport Authority a vaccination center, something that we had no experience, but we partnered with the right people to be able to operate that, not only to vaccinate our employees and their families, but also the local communities. What is really interesting, and going back to the point that you made, Tom, what we're seeing currently in the marketplace, it's actually very strong indicators that business aviation is recovering faster than commercial aviation. And the pandemic is highlighting some of the advantages of business aviation, like more direct connections, saving time. It's being seen as a safer way to travel as well, because you have less touch points, less connections to make. So our customers, like the charter companies, have been saying publicly that they're actually getting a lot of new customers. 70+ % of their new customers that they're onboarding, there are people or companies that have never used business aviation in the past, so never or did not regularly use business aviation. you look at the level of pre-owned aircraft available in the market, and according to JetNet IQ, a thought leader in the industry, it's the lowest level that we've seen in the last. We haven't seen this kind of low level in the last 25 years, and that's an indicator that the market is very strong. And just in August, according to some statistics, the level of activities in business aviation is even higher than in 2019, so pre-pandemic level. Now, we remain prudent with respect to the future. There's still a lot of uncertainty in the economy. The last quarter for Bombardier, I think, was extremely promising. We increased our deliveries compared to 2020 by 45%. We delivered 29 aircraft, and we essentially secured orders. There's a measure in the industry, we call it book to bill ratio. It was 1.8, so more orders than deliveries. We secured over 50 orders in the last quarter. So these are all encouraging signs. And to get back to your question on pivots, I think we certainly learned to be extremely versatile and flexible in the pandemic environment. For us, business mobility goes hand in hand with movement of goods. As you can imagine, we cannot deliver in Canada by just shipping boxes, aircraft in boxes to foreign countries or to other places in Canada. So there's a complex process around inspecting aircraft that needs to be done in order to be able to meet all the requirements, the contractual obligations, and the regulatory environments to deliver the aircraft. So it's been a very complex dance to be able to navigate through all the restrictions, but we had to be flexible and innovative as well. We've sometimes brought the aircraft to our customers to be able to deliver the aircraft. And I think key for us has been to really stay close to our customers and stay the course as well. We've been investing in new service centers around the world. We have a large fleet of business aircraft flying around the world, and it's very important for us to be able to keep on supporting our customers. So despite the challenges around the pandemic, we kept investing. We invested in a new center in Australia, in Melbourne, for servicing business aircraft. We're expanding our service center in Singapore. And, I mentioned the launch yesterday of our new product, the Challenger 3500. I think we need to stay close to our customers and understand their needs to kind of maintain the momentum that we've seen in the business aviation industry.
You bring up an interesting point in terms of your expansion and, building new service centers and so on. And this whole business of taking this opportunity to actually invest, LAX, for example, I think a lot of people know, accelerated a lot of their capital projects, sort of expressing optimism, obviously, for the future, but also deciding that this was the time to do it. So that leads me to, and I just sort of throw this out for a sort of a lightning round and, a quick discussion here among all of you. Choices are being made now about where we want to go. So let me just put out two questions on the table for you and mix them up, do whatever you want with them. Are we ever going to, or how soon, shall I say, are we going to get back to where we were prior to March of 2020? And secondly, what choices should we be making now on a sector-specific basis? What choices do governments and industry have to make now to ensure that not only do we get back to where we were in 2020, but move on well beyond there? I throw it out all to you all, but Tom, why don't you start us?
Sure. I guess in terms of passenger numbers, a lot of the major analysts say that in terms of getting back to 2020 numbers, it could be 2024, 2025. Domestic travel is coming back quickest. Thank goodness the last couple of months it's been coming back in Canada. We've been about 100 days behind the US in terms of passenger traffic recovering, but the international traffic's going to take longer as regulations change, vaccination policies get more consistent. So that's in terms of getting back to normal. But to the second part of your question, what we need to be doing now, and I'll just tell you a bit what we're doing is around sustainability. Sustainability was so important, especially in aviation. Right before COVID, you might remember flight shaming and all kinds of other things that were going on in terms of aviation taking a disproportionate, I'll say, PR hit for the environmental aspects of ESG. So on sustainability, we need to be doing things now. So examples of some of the things we're doing, we just literally put a cogen facility online that's going to reduce our carbon footprint 20%. We will next year break ground on the world's largest solar farm on any airport, over 600 acres, 347,000 panels, enough to power 30,000 homes. There's plans underneath these solar panels to have an apiary. So we're going to be doing the honey production underneath these panels. But very, very sustainable. And we just signed the Amazon pledge. We're the first airport to sign the Amazon pledge for being carbon neutral by 2040. Working with our partners, good example with Air Canada, on a bunch of sustainability initiatives to work together to reduce our carbon footprint. So that is a pivot that we're going to need to be doing for the long term, and something that we can't wait. We need to be doing it now.
Yes, and Nancy, jump in here, but in terms of the choices that we should be making right now, even government choices, just before you do that, let me say to our audience, please use Slido, join this conversation. We're going to weave in what you have to say. And Patrick Snyder, I have your message. We are going to get to it, Patrick. Trust me on this one. But Nancy, back to you now in terms of the choices that we should be making as a country right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm 100% with Tom on the return. I think 2022 is still going to be shaky. I think we'll start to see some level of stability 2023 and an upward trajectory to 2024. All that to say, to me, there's sort of I look at sort of three key elements in terms of where we invest. The first, honestly, is and I'll take this from a very aerospace manufacturing view of the world, obviously with my background. The first is support to the aerospace manufacturers of the world today. Okay. And because we are having to change our strategies, we are having to reduce footprint, we are having to retool, retrain. Okay. And so if we actually want to secure this industry today, we need the support to invest today to keep, these companies viable so that we can then create a future. So what comes next is exactly that. Very, very heavy investment in research and development. We have got to get back into a very heavy investment cycle in aerospace. And we have to remember that, this pandemic cost the aerospace industry tremendous amounts of cash and capital. And so this industry does not necessarily have the funding, right, independently to be able to go into this heavy investment cycle. Yet at the same point, to your earlier point, Tom, this 2030 coming back to 2020, the time is now. And we need to be investing in electrification, in hydrogen fuel cells, in making sustainable aviation, because this is the future and this is what we'll be building in 2030.
Not to interrupt you, but I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper in what you're
Sure.
saying. You're talking about investment. Are you talking about public investment, or are you talking about industry investment?
So I think there's two real aspects. There's most certainly public investment, and recognizing there are a series of programs from the government, okay, but we also have to recognize how much product development actually costs, right? And so when I would debate, whether or not the right volume of funding is there to support the heavy investment cycle. I would also just sort of like to reflect on what we see going on in other countries. So I'll use the US right now. And if anybody's watching the eVTOL industry in the US, which I'm completely fascinated about, the amount of money that is going into this industry in the US is phenomenal. The SPACs that are being set up, the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going into to design, develop, and build these vehicles is unbelievable. And so we will start to lose sort of our place in the world, or our position in the world in terms of being at the forefront of aerospace development if we don't see, and it's not necessarily public, it can also come from private equity like it is in the US. where private equity is certainly stepping up and saying, this is an industry that I believe in, that I'm going to put a lot of money in to progress forward.
Can
And,
I
and
just,
yeah.
sorry, Nancy,
Mhm.
to interrupt, but you bring up a really interesting question, and that is the question of investment. And we look at it sometimes a little bit simplistically by saying it's either public investment or private investment, from the sector itself. But it's also outside investment that we're looking at. Where is that huge ocean of cash that's sloshing around the world right now looking for a home? How do we make that home the sector that we're talking about? And Nancy and Marc, Pierre as well, but jump into this if you have some thoughts. But back to you, Nancy, on that.
Yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned, you look at some of these disruptor, things that are happening in our industry, like eVTOL, which in the US is estimated to be up to a $500 billion industry. And so, yeah, it's, I think that there's an opportunity for us in Canada, and maybe it's the sort of punching above our weight conversation to say that we have something in terms of our skill set and our abilities in this country for aerospace. It's absolutely outstanding. And so how do we not try and get some of those funds that are sloshing around driven into this industry? And it's maybe our own thought process of how we get those investments. Like this concept of a SPAC in the US, for example, that's not something familiar to us in Canadian aerospace.
Mhm.
But it's something real, and it's something where there's a tremendous amount of funds. So I would argue that there is money out there, and we need to funnel it into this industry and start that very heavy development cycle again, as we were doing in sort of the 2010 timeline.
Can I just ask Marc to get in here, because Marc, in many ways, CAE, everybody here is global. Don't get me wrong, but you are particularly global because there's only so many simulators you can sell in Canada. So how, very briefly, if you don't mind, very briefly, how do we attract investment?
I'll promise I'll stay brief on that. I mean, it's happening. Behind the scene, a lot of those eVTOLs people or the OEM of the eVTOL are setting a contact here in Canada. It's not public. I mean, we Canada are viewed like an incredible land of opportunity because of the skill set, the manpower, which is the aerospace manpower, those capability, which are unique in the world. I mean, there's not many places in the world which you can hire hundreds and hundreds of aerospace qualified engineers. Here in Montreal, Aerospace Valley, you can, so they are knocking at our door. I mean, today we're in contact with the majority. CA is in contact. Some is public. If you go on Twitter and all the announcements, you will see a partnership. We've announced a partnership with Volocopter. We've announced a partnership with Beta. We've announced a partnership with Jaunt, 3 of the leading eVTOL manufacturers. All of them are looking for significant capability in Canada. So this is happening, the eVTOL market. My short answer, could we do more? For sure. I know, because I'm in contact with the government, both provincial and federal, are willing to support that activity to some, not front runner on the risk, but certainly, one of the, participant or partner into the equation, because they see, like everybody, some of those players will emerge, that market will exist, and that will be successful. Yeah. And it's going to be a new branch emerging out of the ground.
And it's interesting because you're sort of echoing what Nancy was saying. And if I would sort of simplify it, is that if you're doing the right things, if you're doing the things that investors want you to do, they will give you money to do that, because they will expect that there will be a return and that it will be a successful, in this case, a new venture, which would be interesting. Pierre, I want to come to you again, and let's try and keep this brief, but on the choices that we have to make, that we, the time is right now. We got to start making choices. You work in the government relations area. What choices do the governments have to make? And let me layer one other thing on you, because we just heard from Marc, and that is differentiating the aviation concerns from the aerospace concerns. that, you know, in terms of public policy, we tend to sort of throw them all together because what the heck, they're all airplanes or something like it. So everybody gets the same answer. But the challenges for the aerospace industry are quite different from the aviation industry, and the government choices perhaps should be a little bit more separate than that. But I throw that out to you. Have a go at it.
Thank you, Tom. I think when you look at, you know, I was mentioning that Canada is punching above its weight, and you look at, you know, the ecosystem in Canada, the situation for aerospace compared to other jurisdictions, compared to our competition. And I think the drivers of a strong aerospace industry over the years here in Canada, a sizable aerospace industry, are not the size of the domestic market. It's not the scale of our defense procurement. And if you compare ourselves to other strong aerospace jurisdictions like Europe or the US, so it's other factors like skills, the availability of skills, our ability to innovate, to do R&D. So I think we need a full ecosystem approach, and there are many elements, ingredients to that. I think we have a very strong certification program here in Canada. So the Transport Canada resources for certification and their credibility internationally, it's very critical to the success of our industry. It's actually kind of a calling card for us to be able to get validated and being able to export abroad, because Canada exports, the industry overall export 80% of its output, the aerospace industry. Bombardier, we export 90% of our output.
But Pierre, let me ask you on that point. I mean, you're talking about how well we do it, but do we have to do more? I mean, we're talking here about choices, about looking forward to the future. It's not so much what we were doing in the past, a lot of it very good, but surely we're at a point now where we've got to be doing something a little bit different.
So if I come back to the sustainability piece, which I completely agree is very critical for the future, the industry overall made a commitment to decarbonize the aviation industry. So there's a target that exists for the industry overall that includes operators and manufacturers. It's the Air Transportation Action Group to reduce carbon emission by 50% by 2050. So to get to that goal, there are a lot of actions that need to be taken. And, you know, for sure, we need to invest in the technologies of the future. Nancy mentioned hybrid propulsion, electrical propulsion, hybrid propulsion, integrating this into new aircraft designs as well, aerodynamic design, lighter materials to drive fuel efficiency. So we're making currently, I mean, if I take Bombardier as an example, we're making currently those investments. But for longer range aircraft, like the kind of aircraft that we're manufacturing, it's going to take years. When you factor in the long development cycles in aerospace, it's going to take years, if not decades, to see long-range aircraft with that kind of technologies being commercialized on a large scale. So there are some short-term actions that need to be taken. And I think there's scope for Canada to be more active, for instance, in sustainable aviation fuel. So just last week in the US, the White House released a statement with a number of policies that they laid out to encourage, incentivize the production and the use of sustainable aviation fuel in the US, including via a tax credit scheme to incentivize the production of sustainable aviation fuel. So there's scope for Canada to play a leadership role in this. We are trying, but there are some challenges, including the lack of supplies currently for sustainable aviation fuel. So I think it needs a collective effort. The partnerships will be very key to create, I think, the right environment to be able to encourage the production of sustainable aviation fuel, for instance, and help the industry, help the country on the pathway to decarbonize aviation.
You know what interests me about all of your comments is that when we're talking about the future of aerospace and aviation, look what we've all just talked about. We've talked about decarbonization. This is a conversation we would not have been having 15 years ago. And yet it is soared up to the top of the list. And I might just add that, you know, to tie that into the question of investments, if you take a look at the new ESG guidelines for major investments, it's all the same thing. So we're all sort of heading in the same direction. And I think it's fascinating that the challenge, especially in transportation, and you know, and Tom, you know, what you're doing with the airport is extraordinary in terms of that, in terms of breaking ground for that solar farm, and throwing in honey on top of it. I think is just a cool idea. And there, you know, there could be other cool things in there. Can I just throw out one more issue before I get to Patrick Snyder's thing? And that is that we have all experienced one other thing through this pandemic, or coming out of it, hopefully coming out of it, and that is talent. Finding the people, finding the leaders, not only the leaders of the future, but the people who can make things turn now. It's become a global challenge, and hiring, retaining talent is tough for any industry at this point. What's the one thing that aviation and aerospace in Canada can do in terms of attracting and retaining that type of talent? I don't know who wants to go first. Jump in. Or do you want me? I can do air traffic control and
I can take it, Tom, if you'd like.
Good.
All right. So I think there's two elements, and you know, I think a lot of it, first of all, is the conversation that we just had, because you know, there's people such as myself who are essentially sort of, you know, product development fanatics, who live this industry because they want to see the first flight of the next aircraft, and they want to see the next great thing be developed, right? And so I do believe that if we commit and we put the funds towards that development cycle, that in itself will attract and retain talent. But I don't want to just fall short of that and say the passion for this industry, you know, is going to fulfill us enough. We have seen, you know, this massive retirement wave impact this industry. And we've seen a lot of people leave this industry out of their own choice. And I think sometimes, you know, as aerospace leaders, we have a very, very significant role to play in this conversation. And I think that part of the sustainability is also about work cultures, to be perfectly honest. And I wouldn't sort of be fulfilling my role here as a underrepresented group in aerospace if I didn't sort of raise the elephant in the room, right? And my position on this is that this industry has very, very complex issues that we need to solve. And, you know, we need to look to a much more diverse workforce to solve these complex issues. And I put this onus on the business leaders as well as on political policy, to be honest. We need to, you know, we attract diverse talent by having aerospace leadership teams that are diverse, the whole if you can see it, you can be it philosophy. So I think as an industry, we need to get a handle on this in terms of diversity inclusion and recognize the value that this is going to bring to us, and the amount of untapped talent that's across this country that we can attract and retain to this industry if we really want to. There was a very interesting paper just issued for everyone's reference by the International Aviation Women's Association in partnership with Oliver Weinman this week, which is called Lift Off to Leadership. And so if people want to kind of take away something to read on this topic and how much, you know, that talent could contribute to the industry as well, I really encourage everyone to read it. But I think it's twofold. There's a passion for product that's exciting, but there's also a cultural shift that I think we need to make, and that is becoming more and more close to people's hearts as we emerge from this pandemic.
And one thing I've discovered is that passion doesn't really care about your gender. So, you know, it shouldn't even be part of the discussion to say, well, you know, this has been male dominated for so long. Tom, you've got your hand up. Jump in.
Sure. I just wanted to, first of all, Nancy, just picking up on your last and really important point around having a diverse and inclusive workforce. And you mentioned an organization. There's also in aviation an emerging group for the last 2 years called Elevate Aviation. It's run by Kendra Kincaid, who's a NAV Canada controller, and it's getting a lot of traction, thank goodness, because it's for women and other unrepresented groups. And that is definitely something that we need to do in aviation. I'd say disproportionately underrepresented in those groups. Culture, I totally agree. And then the other thing, and it goes back to the pivot, I think, is we have more people working from home now. And I know it's been very successful at our airport and I'm sure in many of your areas. And in terms of work culture, there's going to be a segment of groups that are going to want the flexibility of being able to work at home. Other new and innovative perks, I'll call them, that will supplement a good work culture that everybody has. So really important. And then my last point would be, as cool as it is, I think, to work in aviation, and it is, and it's all throughout my career, we've been scarred a bit in the last 18 months. So where you used to go to a party and say you worked at an airport or an aerospace or somewhere else, just by virtue of the downturn, we've got to kind of revitalize that passion for aviation. It'll come, but it's been a bit of a new phenomenon, I think, in terms of attracting workforce.
It's a very good point. I was at an event not too long ago, Tom, where somebody introduced themselves as working at the airport here in Ottawa, and the answer was, "Oh," and that shouldn't be the response. Pierre, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I want to pick up on my colleagues' comments. I agree. It's not the only, I think, the only piece to this, but I think communications is very important, especially with the younger generation, and even at the really high school level, when our young people are considering their career path, and you know, with the impact of the pandemic on the aviation, there has been, I think, to Tom's point, negative kind of press around the future of the industry, or at least the struggles that the industry currently is going through. But you know, talking about what the future looks like, the exciting projects that many companies have in Canada, you know, all the efforts to decarbonize the industry, what we've been just talking about, I think we need to share that much more with the general population, but also in particular with the young people. And you know, obviously companies have to invest in the long term. Nancy is very much aware of you know, the Women in Engineering initiative. I would really echo Nancy's comment. I think we need a more diverse and inclusive workforce, and there's a lot of untapped potential in our society. So we are trying to attract more women in engineering skills. We need to create internships, and we've been trying to be a leader in this. Even during the pandemic, we had over 1,000 internship positions within the company, and we're trying to in the cohorts of interns to grow underrepresented groups, women or visible minorities, and so on and so forth. So I think it's very key. Companies need to invest for the long term as well.
You know, there was a great story talking about attracting a more diverse workforce. I mean, it goes without saying that this should not, you know, that we have 50% of the population, females, who represent more than 50% of the intelligence in this country. And why aren't they in the industry in greater numbers? But I remember at a time in the United States when they were having trouble with the H-1B visa, which is the temporary worker visa. And those who had H-1B visas were being kicked out of the country. And Canada very smartly, and this was more in the tech sector, bought big billboards in San Francisco saying, having trouble with your H-1B visa, come to Canada. And it was sort of like, you know, why waste your time fighting down here when you can have a lovely job up there? And you know, Marc, it does seem to me that communication, getting ourselves known around the world for that type of diversity, to attract the best and the brightest in the world, you've got to be on the cusp of doing the best and brightest work in the world to get those people to come, right?
Totally. I mean, it's a priority. The aerospace sector is, us in Canada, we're in the same boat as worldwide. They're the tech, the high tech, the dot-com. It's sort of attracting the engineers at the very early on in their stage, and because of the instability, aerospace is sort of taking a backseat. And us in Canada, we need to be extremely smart and fire on all cylinders. The type of event we're doing, contact regular with the university, work integrated learning experience, projects. That young generation has got values, and they want to find a company which is the same ethics and the same values. So you need to align your mission towards their values, and you need to align your ethics around what they're looking for. And you need to explain to them, why is it exciting creating something that provides mobility to people, their safety, or a better world for tomorrow? But it's a battle. It's a non-stop battle. And we need to play every smart advantage that you just referred to. Attracting foreign people in the US is difficult. Then we need to make it easy for us. We need to make a bigger space for women into the workforce, and we are aggressively pursuing this, diligently opening new positions and diverse work position at CA. It's our challenge. At the roots, the biggest asset we have and the biggest engine behind the aerospace industry is the workforce. Without them, the buildings, the brick, the motor, they're not going to do anything.
Can I throw in, because I agree with you, let me throw in one other factor into that. And this comes from my passion for the industry, because I was trained as a pilot. I mean, to me, it was the magic of flight. For a lot of people, how airplanes stay in the sky is still a bit of a mystery. And so it is a very magical experience. And out of that love of flight, then comes your interest in the industry, and you might find a place in it. And this brings us very neatly to Patrick Snyder. So Patrick, I told you I'd get there, and I am. So Patrick brings up an interesting point in this area. Now, he says changes to regulations to flight schools have had, imposed significant new costs. Tom, you'd be aware of this as an airport operator, but the number of private pilots in this country is declining rapidly. As a result, perhaps because of that, but perhaps because of other issues, cost and other things. Should there be new measures to reintroduce the magic of aviation and aerospace? I mean, we're talking technically, but we also talked about that passion and how do you find it? And one of the ways you find it is to actually get in the left seat and go up 3,000 feet in the air. And that is just a magical experience.
Let me raise my hand, Tom, into this, because this is something we live with day in. I mean, the entry barrier to become a professional commercial pilot, is to the tune of $100,000 to $200,000. You need to do your ground school, flight schools, and eventually the type certification in the simulator. It's quite of a journey, quite expensive, and traditionally, the military, the air forces were providing quota pilots, retiring, but that has dried up essentially. Now, some situation, the airlines are going and they're sponsoring directly the students, but that remains the exception. I think, what we're looking for is, because, if you succeed, you have the means to pay back that initial investment, but it's the initial. And what we see today is we got families footing the bill for the kid to progress essentially, and taking upon themselves the risk of the kid essentially finishing his journey. But we need to look into partnership, where you evaluate the individual at the beginning and you say, okay, this one has got 98%, and then the bank can loan the money, 98% chances of finishing the journey and obtaining a job which will let them pay the initial investment. So there's a partnership to be explored with banks and financial institutions that we are sort of, working at between that arrangement. So there's something to be done. It's not a cheap investment to become a pilot.
No,
Totally motivated. You know about it.
I know all about that.
Yeah.
But Tom, let me throw this quickly to you, because I think the changes in regulations that Patrick was referring to may be specific to Ontario, but across the country, to Marc's point, it ain't cheap to get into this industry. at least from a flying perspective. Should that be one of the things that we do?
Well, maybe we could get a win-win here and not only do that, but make sure that we have a disproportionately large portion of underrepresented people in that industry. It is hugely expensive. And I think there's also something that we need to educate everybody on, is that just because the industry is going through a bit of turmoil now because of COVID, there might be some young people out there that say, oh, gee, you know, I'm gonna have to wait forever to get a pilot seat, when in reality, there's so many pilots that are retiring that there's gonna be giant opportunities, and we're gonna just run through this again where we have a big pilot shortage. So yes, definitely there should be some type of a program that creates a win-win, or it'll be just like we're talking about with all these other things. We're going to find ourselves a few years down the road with another crisis of a pilot shortage.
Yeah. And I would just say, any young pilot listening to this, there's nothing wrong with working up north, flying beavers from place to place, because that's the best training you're ever going to get in aviation. Sorry, that was just a little thing from me on that. We are now at the point where we've only got about, less than 5 minutes. We've got about 4 minutes left. I want to give each of you a chance, just to final thought. Please keep it brief, because we do have an on-time performance to meet here. Tom, you'd understand that. From an airline perspective. So let me run through, and let me start with you, Nancy. Because you're the first on my screen looking that way. So please go right ahead.
Super. First of all, I appreciate also the continued references to the beaver. I think we might have a role in our sales team for you. So it's fabulous. I'll just triangulate here, because there's a couple of facts I just wanted to bring back for people's consideration. So to Pierre's point, we punch way above our weight. In fact, Canada is the world's 5th largest aerospace market. Okay, and keeping in mind, we are 39th in global population. So that's the dichotomy. That's how advanced we are on the world stage of aerospace. When you look at the numbers, which you referenced at the beginning of the session, Tom, 13 billion up to 25 billion, 90,000 jobs up to 200,000 jobs. Okay, and then you look at the opportunity ahead. We've talked about sustainability. This morning, Sir Richard Branson talked about space, that he'd love to bring space to Canada. We've talked about eVTOL. We could talk about supersonic. I'd love to debate it with someone. So you look at how this industry is emerging. You triangulate those 3 facts and you say, if we commit as a country, as an industry, to really invest in aerospace and keep our place in the world stage, we have only upwards to go from that 25 billion. They're big industries, they're big numbers that are coming our way. And we have the people, the skill set, the talent to make it happen in this country. So that's really how I triangulate the conversation this afternoon. I love the dialogue. Thank you so much. It's been fabulous. And I'll look forward to our next opportunity to debate the topics.
Terrific. I'll just point out to the rest of you that we have 3 minutes left. So if you could each take 1 minute. Marc, over to you.
I'll be brief. I travel to a lot of country around the world, and a lot of country are jealous about the aerospace industry. We should be very proud of it. It's a jewel. And however, the world is changing. The aerospace sector, the way we've known it, and the aviation is going to emerge differently out of the COVID, from a sustainability point of view, from a passenger journey point of view. I think we need to not be afraid to be bold, take bold move, and innovate forward, and take the leadership on some of those elements and capture them for Canada to go forward. eVTOL is one of them. Green aircraft, green propulsion are all the subjects we should be pursuing aggressively. My 2 cents. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks very much. Pierre.
It's very quickly. I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you for for hosting us. I think we mentioned how fiercely competitive the industry is globally, and really what we're looking at is many jurisdictions are putting in place very assertive policies to be able to attract space investments, grow the aerospace sector. So I think we need to be mindful of that. And to me, partnerships are really key. partnerships with governments, but with other stakeholders, with academia, between companies, between larger businesses and smaller enterprises as well, to really protect what we have, grow, up our game. I think there's a lot of scope in many areas to do more. I think Canada, in terms of, for instance, leveraging defense procurement to drive domestic innovation, we could do more. Other countries are doing that quite effectively. And the last point I would make, we didn't really touch on that, but that's one of the learnings from the pandemic for us. In North America, we bring a number of skills collectively, and we actually build things together. We have a lot of US suppliers. We have operations in the US. We have operations in Mexico. And these are all intertwined. And you know what we saw during the pandemic, sometimes inconsistent policies, one jurisdiction saying, well, aerospace is essential, another jurisdiction saying it's not essential, but it's all connected. So I think, you know, policymakers and businesses need to keep this in mind as well as we invest and we think about policy to grow the aerospace sector in the future.
Pierre, thank you very much. And Tom, you get the last word.
Okay, 45 seconds. First of all, I
Take
still
a minute.
sit in,
Take a minute.
I still sit in the window seat because I love aviation. So there you go. E-commerce, we really didn't get to it, but we can rock the world here with e-commerce. Geography alone, circumpolar for air, and we're a day and a half closer by ocean. If you look at the curvature of North America from Asia, and now with actually COVID has accelerated the growth of e-commerce. And we can be at the forefront of that in a business that permeates every individual in North America and throughout the world. So I just see that as a giant opportunity for Canada going forward.
Well, thank you very much. And speaking of commerce, you know, the other great success story in this country, e-commerce, since you brought it up, Tom, the company Shopify has this great slogan, which is "Arm the Rebels." And in many respects, I guess that's what we should be doing. We should be arming the rebels, continuing to be disruptive. And that's the only way that you're going to lead is being disruptive and perhaps arming the rebels. I want to thank you all very much. That was a lot of fun spending some time with you today and talking about not so much just the challenges, but some of the promises of what lies ahead. So thank you, Tom Ruth, President and CEO of the Edmonton International Airport, Marc St-Hilaire, Chief Technology Officer and Vice President from CAE, Nancy Barber, Senior Advisor to de Havilland, and Pierre Pyun, Bombardier's Vice President of Government Affairs. It's been terrific. And I'd just like to add a thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for putting on not only this panel, but this day.